We are entering a decade of division where five top billionaires have doubled their wealth, but on the other hand, 5 billion people collectively have become poorer. And Oxfam is estimating that within just a decade, we'll have a trillionaire amongst us. But on the other hand, it'll take more than 200 years to end poverty. This is an era of billionaire supremacy where they're dodging taxes, they're underpaying taxes, they're squeezing workers, they're privatizing public services and plundering the planet Earth. I certainly feel angry. I would say having billionaires is a failure. Very often when we are here at the World Economic Forum, you end up celebrating billionaires. But I think it's a sign of failure that we have 800 million people, 10% of the global population, sleeping hungry. They do not have enough food to eat. 800 million people. And on the other hand, you have these billionaires with their private yachts, private jets, and a lifestyle which cannot even be understood.
Yep, and it's about to get worse if we don't pay attention to what is going on this week in Davos for the World Economic Forum annual meeting. In this video, we're going to be talking about one of the key agenda items that has been sparking some controversy online. That, as well as what we can do about stopping it. All this and more on The Reading Room. Top overall focus for this year is rebuilding trust. And how are they going to do it? By injecting fear, of course. And a lot of these so-called crises that we're seeing in the world today are a result of the very same people who think that they know best in telling the world on how to solve it. So on Wednesday, the big conversation is around preparing for Disease X. Now, for those that are not aware, or just a quick reminder, the WHO, United Nations, and the World Economic Forum, they're all non-governmental organizations in which no one elected them to be put in charge to lead any of this global stuff that they're doing. If you haven't heard, there is a serious power grab going on right now in order to get people under one global ecosystem in order to centralize everything and compile data so it can fuel this AI world that they are building and envisioning for us. So this pandemic treaty, in parallel with updating the international health regulations, will bypass any rights that you or your country may have in the event they call a pandemic and carry out their protocols that they have defined. And the Western world, who are such advocates for democracy, are selling its own people out. Most alarming is the United States doing it. In September of 2023, the Biden regime had issued a press statement on its collaboration and commitment to the World Health Organization in getting this pandemic treaty together and following through with it. As you can see here, they make it very clear that they have joined in this global coalition, or aka One World Government, in order to come up with this plan by going along with getting us all under this One Health, by expanding bilateral health security partnerships with countries around the world to collaborate on ways to improve disease detection capabilities, strengthen laboratory systems, train health workers, enhance One Health, which is the platform that they want everyone to be under, all countries, including China. They continue to go on by saying working with the private sector to support an improved medical countermeasure ecosystem so countries around the world can more equitably secure access to vaccines, tests, treatments, etc., yada, yada. But get this, how much are we funding it? $450 million that we plan to contribute to this regime and takeover of our personal sovereignty, and an additional $250 million to be given to help other countries as well. Now, we continue on by saying here in bullet number 4, strengthening the global health architecture by working with partners to modernize existing organizations like the World Health Organization, and working to amend international health regulations and successfully negotiate the pandemic accord so the world is better ready to respond to the next health security threat in a more rapid, coordinated, transparent, and equitable way. Let's stop there. If you're an American and you're looking at this should infuriate every single one of you because they are willing to turn over our health information so it can be shared with all these various countries, including China and Russia. I don't know how comfortable you feel about that, but considering how badly botched the WHO carried out and coordinated their efforts when the first pandemic came around, I'm sorry, I don't trust Dr. Tedros with this information. So, for those that don't know, Dr. Tedros has been caught up in quite a bit of corruption in his previous role as the Ethiopian health minister. In fact, he was accused of covering up this cholera outbreak in which many people had died, all for political purposes. So, fast forward, this guy was the one who announced this pandemic in March, but knew fully well what had been going on back as early as January with the Chinese. Here's Tucker Carlson, one of the very few broadcasters who called this out way back then.
Tedros Adhanom, he's the Director General of the World Health Organization, got his job with Chinese support after he covered up cholera outbreaks in his home country, a perfect man to lead the World Health Organization. And he has subsequently set the standard for corruption there. Here he is in January. Watch this.
The Chinese government is to be congratulated for the extraordinary measures it has taken to contain the outbreak. The speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with WHO and the world are very impressive and beyond words. China is actually setting a new standard for outbreak response, and it's not an exaggeration.
That's the top public health official in the world, and everything you just heard him say there was a lie. A recent 60 Minutes piece from Australia, a piece our media are not playing, shows just how deep the lies go. In fact, there was nothing speedy about how China detected the outbreak and then warned the world. Indeed, they did the exact opposite.
From the very beginning, throughout December, it was spreading, and we now know it was spreading human to human. But the official line of the Chinese government was that this was all related to an animal market, and once they closed the market, it would all go away.
Did they know differently at that time?
Absolutely. Because they were seeing cases coming into the hospitals that had nothing whatsoever to do with that animal market.
So the World Health Organization's leadership tells you that China, quote, set the standard for the outbreak to the response. Apparently that standard includes disappearing doctors who tell the truth about it.
As China now tries to rewrite history and claim it was transparent all along, a final nail in the coffin of their lie. Just 2 weeks ago, the head of emergency at Wuhan Central Hospital, Dr. Ai Fen, also went public, saying authorities had stopped her and her colleagues from warning the world. She has now disappeared, whereabouts unknown.
Again, why is it left to Australian media to produce a piece like this? The truth is, as 60 Minutes Australia explains, instead of worrying about these developments, in early February, the director of the World Health Organization was still lecturing the public that using terms like Wuhan virus was racist.
Having a name matters to prevent the use of other names that can be inaccurate or stigmatizing.
You might think that a World Health Organization, a group that got 58 million of your tax dollars last year, might care that a government arrests doctors and lies about deadly new diseases, but no. Like so many other organizations, they are lapdogs for the powerful, and that means their real job is sucking up to the Chinese government.
So let's talk about this World Health Organization UNWEF power grab. It's important to understand from the World Health Organization standpoint, this power grab comprises of three components. One of them is this pandemic treaty, but people need to understand that in parallel is also the international health regulations that is being updated to reflect this pandemic treaty and the various amendments that do give away our sovereignty. And then the third component is the architecture network on how they plan on making this all work and the parties that are involved in the surveillance, data collection, and pretty much taking away your rights. So let's get into the first component, which is the pandemic treaty accord. So Anthony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State, is going to Davos this week to talk to the World Economic Forum and sell the Americans out. He is in full support of this pandemic treaty and working with the WEF and the World Health Organization and the United Nations in giving away our sovereignty. If you don't believe me and think that I'm spewing out conspiracy, hear it from his mouth himself, and you decide. This was taken last year when Anthony Blinken testified or went to Congress to talk about the 2024 budget. And here is Rep. Chris Smith from New Jersey asking about this pandemic treaty.
The zero draft WHO pandemic treaty that the administration and others are pushing to get put into effect at the WHO starts off with a harsh criticism of the United States and the international community by calling it a catastrophic failure of the community in showing solidarity and equity in response to the coronavirus pandemic. I've read the treaty. I'm concerned about it. Article 4 pays lip service to sovereignty, and then has language that says, however, activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to their peoples and countries. So therefore, WHO would be empowered to step in. And we're talking about Tedros, a man who's been put into that position by the People's Republic of China. He was their candidate and obviously showed terrible, terrible judgment in the beginning and even to this day in recognizing the origins of the of COVID-19. Article 10 says that 20%, the United States would be obligated to provide 20% of our medical supplies, including tests, antiviral vaccines, medications, and the like, to WHO. For them, they just say, we want it, you have to give it by treaty obligation. The sovereignty issue is the biggest, in my opinion. You're pushing for it. Next year is probably when it may get adopted. Will it be sent to the Senate for ratification? Or are you planning on using the executive agreement, which I think is a terrible way to do things? It ought to go to the Senate for ratification.
Congressman, thank you very much. Good to see you again as well. First, I'll try and be brief. We are not engaged in negotiating a COVID treaty. What we're engaged in is trying to strengthen the global architecture for dealing with pandemics and do it in a way that, for example, make sure that if there's a next time, and I think there inevitably will be a next time, that countries actually are committed to transparency, to sharing information, to giving access to international inspectors, that we have the tools to do that, and the countries agree to that. That's, of course, not what China did in this instance, and we've all paid a price for that. At the same time, I think what we clearly demonstrated is over the course of the pandemic, the United States was the leading and most generous country in making sure that vaccines could be made available to those who needed them. We did it through COVAX. We did it free of charge. We did it without political strings attached, and I can tell you that has dramatically benefited our diplomacy and our standing in the world, especially in contrast to the way other countries.
Honestly, for him to just smooth talk that and be like, oh, no, we have to share data. We have to have transparency, not even taking into consideration that China is also in the mix here of the countries that will be a part of this. And then at the same time, talking about China's failure. Come on, man. This shows that there is absolutely no regard for our personal sovereignty here. And they're willing to get around invading our privacy because of our Fourth Amendment law. And this is something that the government has been trying for, the last few years to really try and break that amendment that we have in our rights in order to have access. I mean, this is so alarming to me that it's not being talked about more. And We're falling asleep here at the wheel by not educating ourselves and learning about what is being said in Congress. And the sad part about it is that this happened when the Patriot Act was passed. The Obama administration sold us out, and we didn't even know. And now they're trying to take more rights away from us by doing this. What's truly alarming to me is recognizing that our government has been infiltrated with Marxists who are pushing a very dangerous ideology. Just to show you an example of what I mean by that, in December of 2023, Congress held a hearing to talk about this pandemic treaty. As you can see, not many people attended, nor was it broadcasted of importance. This is why I'm thinking, the government is really doing a great job to keep this very stealth. And as you can see, the three people that were called to testify were brought in by the Biden administration. Let's talk about the first one, Miss Lois Pace. So Miss Lois works in the Department of Health and Human Services and is the Assistant Secretary for Global Affairs. She oversees HHS's engagement with foreign governments and international institutions, as well as policy-making bodies such as the G7, G20, the United Nations, General Assembly, and the World Health Organization. She previously served as President and Executive Director of Global Health Council and was also a part of the Biden-Harris Transition COVID Advisory Board. She advocated for increased monies in global health that went to the World Health Organization. And prior to that, she holds a degree and honors from Stanford University. Yes, our favorite place where Marxists are grown, and is a part of the International Health and Human Rights, receiving a distinction of Delta Omega from, you guessed it, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health. You know Johns Hopkins, the one that did the tabletop exercise right before the pandemic outbreak with Bill Gates? Yeah, that place. The person sitting next to Ms. Pace is Dr. John Neckinsong, and he is the Ambassador at Large, U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator, and Senior Bureau Official for Global Health Security and Diplomacy Bureau of Global Health Security and Diplomacy. Talk about a redundant title. What I don't understand is how is this guy put in this position? Because an ambassador at large is a diplomat representing their country in more locations than ambassador in residence. Ambassadors at large may operate from several countries or serve as the highest ranking diplomat for a whole region. They may also serve on international committees or participate in organizations like the United Nations, representing issues from their home country. I guess what makes me uneasy about Dr. John Neckinsong, and before anyone calls me a racist, know that I am a person of color myself. I'm pointing out the fact that this guy is not an American citizen, but holds a very important position within the State Department's Bureau of Global Health Security and Diplomacy. He is the one assisting with the relations in getting this pandemic treaty or accord passed through. I'll get into a portion of his testimony that should raise red flags to everyone. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the last point that I'd like to point out about this guy is the tight alignment and relationship that Dr. Neckinsong has with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And in 2020, he was awarded the Global Goalkeeper Award, in which Dr. Neckinsong and his team at Africa CDC were all in making sure that these COVID vaccines were pushed out across the continent, ensuring that they were able to fight COVID-19. In case you didn't know, Bill and Melinda are, I believe, the largest donors to the World Health Organization. And they are big supporters of getting everybody on this global platform in order to push these digital IDs. Here are Bill and Mel.
And I think, it's up to us as citizens to rebuild the world that we want. I think this crisis has exposed some of the gaps around the world, but particularly in the United States. And one of those in particular are the gender and the racial inequities that exist. There are many, many people who have phones and do digital banking on their phone. They have access to money on their phone, mobile money. That was at scale in a number of countries. But all of a sudden, people really said, oh my gosh, to not have to stand in line for my government payment where I might get sick. So just to take Pakistan alone, in 48 hours, 40 million additional people signed up for a digital bank account. That is an opportunity we can use, and particularly use to reach low-income families and women on that phone with all kinds of things like cash transfers, more information about when health services are available. So some of those digital opportunities are really hitting in ways we didn't expect as quickly as we had thought they would.
Now, the third guy that testified was Dr. Atul Gawande, and he is the Assistant Administrator for Global Health. He is known for being a surgeon, writer, public health leader, as well as he was CEO of Haven, the Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan Chase healthcare venture. Interesting, right? Dr. Gawande is also, too, a Stanford alumni, and it should be no surprise that he is an agenda contributor to the World Economic Forum. Need I say any more? But let's get back to the recent congressional hearing, beginning with the red flags surrounding first with our diplomat, Dr. John Nkengasong.
The State Department and Department of Health and Human Services have also been representing the United States in the ongoing pandemic agreement negotiations, which are generating recommendations for member states to promote cooperation on preventing, preparing, and responding to future pandemics. Ambassador Nkengasong, what steps is the State Department taking to advance the United States' interest in global health leadership in the ongoing pandemic agreement negotiations?
Thank you. The State Department is working very closely with colleagues from the Department of Health and Human Services to support our team, negotiating team in Geneva. And it is very clear, as you rightly said, that we need this instrument, pandemic accord, or pandemic agreement, that would protect us. I mean, if you ask me to summarize that in one line, I would say it is an accord that will do the things that we have been discussing here, which is allow us to detect early, respond early. A threat that will emerge and invariably will emerge because we all know that we live in an era of pandemics. So we're actually looking at ways we could continue to work with several countries, more than 190 countries around the table negotiating this. It's not a fast process, but it's a necessary process. We have to be at the table and continue to show leadership in the way we work with countries to share sequences, share viruses when the threat arises, and share, of course, the medical countermeasures. I think that is central to our ability to protect ourselves. Imagine if a virus or an unknown virus emerged in any way in the world where we don't have access to that. I mean, we rely on this kind of an accord or agreement to have access to those specimens, sequences, so that we can develop a diagnostic test, vaccines, or therapeutics.
Folks, this guy is bullshitting Congress. This already exists in the 2005 IHR, the one that they're trying to update to include getting people onto this one digital surveillance platform. Feel free to pause the video yourself and see that there is already a mandate in the previous agreement to share data as well as provide access to diagnostics, as you can see here. Also, they do have measurements in place to proactively monitor various regions for various viruses that have broken out. How do you think they knew about this virus or coronavirus that was happening in China? They knew way before any one of us, and they were monitoring it. So this, sneaky way of saying, oh, we need this and we need that, almost as if it doesn't exist, is a lie. It's there in black and white.
Assistant Secretary Pace, how will the framework of the recommendations in the pandemic agreement apply lessons we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic to advance international pandemic prevention and preparedness?
Well, certainly, this potential agreements would do quite a bit to complement what is already in place, such as the international health regulations. One of the shortcomings, unfortunately, of the COVID-19 pandemic is it did not allow for a high degree of accountability when it came to accessing innovations in particular. And one of the things we are trying to negotiate as part of this agreement is to ensure that those innovations reach everyone, including Americans, on time. As the ambassador mentioned, that involves sharing samples and data so that we can actually produce or manufacture these innovations. In other words, spur R&D, essential R&D.
So the net of this word salad and her delicately trying to make this point really boils down to it being about money and competition. The United States was not first to market with a vaccine for COVID, and I think that was a wake-up call for Big Pharma here to say, oh, we should have invested more money into making vaccines profitable, because for a long time, investment into that didn't really pay off. But now everyone's seeing how much money can be made. All of a sudden now vaccines are the new rage.
But then there's a question of how these innovations reach people around the world. That isn't just a moral question, but it's a strategic one, frankly.
Notice her choice of words, how these innovations, how these vaccines should be able to reach people all around the world. And notice that she uses the word moral. Yeah, there are people who don't want this shit in their body because of whether it be their religious beliefs or just their personal sovereignty. But then she follows up by saying strategic way, like a strategic way, meaning like, okay, we're going to cut your bank account off if you don't get this vaccine. You can see how careful she's speaking.
Because in the absence of vaccinations, for example, we had the opportunity for variants to emerge and thus kept us in this ongoing fight against COVID.
No, that is a result of Big Pharma being greedy, as well as the media injecting fear, as well as our government lying to us. Oh, and let's not forget that the government was putting pressure on social media companies to remove American voices that didn't align with this vaccine narrative that they were forcing down the country's throats. Now you understand the big reason as to why the U.S. is so gung-ho about getting this agreement in place. Because what it will essentially do is bypass our Constitution, because once a health crisis is announced, by default, their powers kick in, ours kick out. Are you okay with that? I'm not.
So it's our hope that this potential agreement helps to, again, sort of buttress what we are able to do at a more technical level with regards to pandemic preparedness and response.
Ms. Pace is so sly with her words. Slipping in technical, you mean technology forcing us down the path of digital IDs? Yeah, I think that's what she meant. Because that's where we're going. We adopt this, then, that digital platform that they're setting up is not only going to be used for just tracking viruses. Of course, they're going to be tracking everything else, like climate change, food consumption, all these SDG goals that they're trying to meet, which we're so far off of target. And a big portion as to why we're so far off of target was exactly to what the beginning of this video stated, was that these folks are making it worse for us. And we have to recognize things are not improving for the rest of the world, except for the 0.001% that is controlling the wealth. And that needs to be called out.
Thank you. And as negotiations for the pandemic agreement have been underway, there have been some misrepresentations of how this treaty would square with the United States sovereignty. Ambassador Nguyengasong, could you please help us understand, correct the record regarding these misinterpretations?
Thank you, Congressman. Let me say up front that that has not at all been a subject of discussion during the pandemic accord or agreement. We will not allow such, if ever such a discussion was to occur during the negotiation, I can assure you that we will not allow it to happen.
I'm really struggling to understand how he could say this with a straight face. It's either one, he's lying, Or two, the people that he is negotiating with and working with are not making it a priority to protect American civil rights, which I think could be the latter, because what I'm seeing in our representation at the WHO, it seems like intellectual property rights are more important than our personal sovereignty and the protection of our data. It seems like they're all fine and dandy with throwing that out and getting on board with this transparency, but God forbid, we don't want anyone to take away our IP rights because, hey, we need to make money. Here's what our representative said in the last pandemic treaty meeting that was held in December of 2023.
And now, with respect to the pandemic accord, we support the regional statement delivered by Mexico and thank the member states of the Americas for productive discussions last week in Washington. The United States remains fully committed to this process. This agreement will be a meaningful step forward in advancing global health security for all people. It should be ambitious, but also practical, operationally feasible, and implementable. We appreciate that the new text has been streamlined. However, we are disappointed that more input from the co-facilitators has not been incorporated. As we move forward, an important guiding principle is that we should not undermine aspects of the system that worked in the response to COVID-19. Eliminating intellectual property protections will not effectively improve equitable access during pandemic emergencies and will in fact harm the systems that have served us well in the past. The United States believes strongly in IP protections, which serve to fuel investment and innovation. We agree that more timely access to these innovations should be central to our discussions and are exploring options to prioritize the availability of medical countermeasures for developing countries during future pandemic emergencies. We are also looking carefully at the pathogen access and benefit sharing system so that we can provide constructive feedback that will make the system effective and consequential.
I want to note that this should be very concerning to Americans, that this is all this woman had to say about this massive platform that they want to build in order to provide surveillance, to monitor, to track, to restrict, to block. I mean, this is all she had to say about it. Shows you where their priorities are.
We have serious reservations about the mechanism for financing proposed in Article 20, recognizing we must tackle this element of pandemic PPR in a meaningful way. There should be no doubt that the U.S. commitment to equity or global health. The United States is the world's largest global health donor. Since 2021, we've spent nearly $16 billion globally to end the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have provided hundreds of millions of vaccine doses to over 100 countries. In addition, the United States has committed $700 million to the pandemic fund to date to support countries in filling critical gaps. We understand that effectively implementing this agreement will require resources and want to work with partners to strengthen the financing architecture to ensure that this agreement will make a difference in tangible ways. We have continually urged consideration of industry and stakeholder views, which will be essential for the future implementation of this agreement. This outreach needs to be done with greater intensity, given these partnerships will provide important information about the viability of many of the proposals in the text. We are willing to accept this draft as the basis for negotiation, but stress that member states must begin direct negotiations expeditiously, focusing on areas of highest impact and priority, preferably beginning with Chapter 2. We strongly urge continuing the informals with a clear mandate to the co-facilitators, perhaps working with a dedicated bureau member to further their work and bring new texts back to the IMB for consideration.
America's freedoms are being stolen right out from under us. And unfortunately, America is so distracted with all the other noise by the media that for whatever reason, they're not talking about this. And I almost wonder if that is by design, because ultimately this is a goal, a very hard goal that they're trying to get through in May of 2024.
As a matter of fact, when you look at the draft that is circulating, the draft pandemic accord agreement or instrument, on Article 3, Section 2, clearly on the principles, clearly stipulates and affirms the importance of the sovereignty of the countries, that it is the countries themselves that have the right over their people. I think that is very clear, Article 3, Section 2 of that.
I'm just curious, does this man think American people are stupid? Let's take a look at what he's referring to, and you tell me if you get the warm and fuzzy of trusting this man and what he says. So the reference he's making is right here. Article 3, bullet number 2. This is all they say about sovereignty. States have, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the general principles of international law, the sovereign right to legislate and to implement legislation in pursuance of their health policies. Sounds harmless, right? But when you look at the international health regulations that they're trying to amend, guess what? In that policy, it's going to state that states will have to update their regulations in order to reflect this to take into action. So this is all bullshit. And quite frankly, nobody seems to be looking out for the people and maintaining our personal sovereignty. But here it is, folks. This is how deceptive and manipulative these people are. You know, it's really disheartening to see how this administration has sold the American people out. And they're doing it through exploiting minorities, women, and people of color.
So I think the misinformation or disinformation is unfortunate. It's at all, the Accord has absolutely nothing to do with the sovereignty of our country.
Thank you. And now that we have closed the chapter,
technically, that's true because this refers back to the International Health Regulations governance document that is being amended, in which that's where your sovereignty is stated to be taken away. And I don't think this congressman has made the connection of that. Otherwise, he should have pushed back. Here's one example in the International Health Regulations document that they're amending in how they will be using personal data. Now, our person, Ms. Pace, who has been negotiating, did submit and push back on certain amendments. Did she touch Article 45 to try and protect the sovereignty of the American people? Nope. As you can see, Ms. Lois Pace didn't include any type of edit to Article number 45 when it comes to personal data. So there you have it, folks. Selling us out, and we don't even know it unless you dig deeper to look at exactly what it is that the U.S. is negotiating with the WHO. They're negotiating and protecting their own interests, but they don't care about the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today. This is an important conversation due to the COVID-19 pandemic response, government lockdowns, forced vaccinations, school closures. Many Americans have lost faith and trust not only in our government, but also in the WHO, and it's extremely serious. The WHO colluded with the Chinese Communist Party. In January of 2020, the WHO repeated Chinese communist propaganda by saying that there was no human-to-human transmission with COVID. The WHO waited several weeks to declare COVID-19 a public health emergency because China insisted they had the situation under control, which was a lie. The WHO did not impose any travel restrictions, unlike President Trump, to help slow the spread of COVID-19 because China did not want their economy to slow down. The WHO continued to praise China's handling of the pandemic despite a globally recognized cover-up. The WHO went along with the CCP's fake claims about the origins of the virus not being from a lab, and our investigations and our own intelligence agencies have told us otherwise. The International Health Regulations, the IHR, is a treaty of the WHO meant to usher in a new era of global public health that requires all member states to cooperate to make the world more secure. The IHR requires only a simple majority to amend it. There have been over 300 amendments proposed, and member states will not be able to see these amendments before they are scheduled to vote. At an October 2023 meeting, the working group compiling the amendments for the 77th World Health Assembly in May 2024 was told that they do not have to produce their document before the meeting. Some of the amendments include expanding the ability of the WHO Director General to declare public health emergencies to include regional declarations as well as intermediate threats, allowing Director General to act on information in the public domain without verification from member states, and creation of a compliance committee to enforce their rules. I can assure you the American people do not want the WHO enforcing any rules on their own personal decisions regarding their health. If certain IHR amendments are adopted next year, sovereign countries, including the United States, would be obligated to adhere to the treaty. The Biden administration led the charge for amendments to the IHR, including a new compliance committee. The treaty would create a conference of the parties which could call on the United Nations for help in implementing the treaty. There is already talk of that conference of the parties being merged together with the IHR. While the Biden administration wants to entangle the U.S. in more globalist organizations and imperil the health and safety of American citizens, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the WHO completely, wisely anticipating such precarious mandates as the ones being proposed. The move toward a global health security state is reliant upon surveillance, which relies on data. Remember China, that's what they did to their citizens and still do. The treaty and the IHR call for more sharing of personal health data in the name of safety and outbreak prevention. That's an invasion of privacy for the American people. The next step is to create a digital profile of everyone in the world, and if the WHO is given binding power, the UN will essentially have the power to restrict any American's movement, access to health care, medicine, etc. I can assure you right now the American people will never comply with anything like this from a globalist organization regarding their personal health decisions, and as a matter of fact, any way they decide to conduct their lives. I think this is extremely dangerous. I have a question, Ms. Pace. The working group for the IHR were told recently they did not have to produce their final draft of proposed amendments to the IHR for the 77th World Health Assembly until the event in May 2024. How can the U.S. or any member state have any meaningful way to evaluate and consider the proposed amendments before they are put to a vote?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Congresswoman. This is a really important issue for us, especially considering our leadership on the international health regulations, not only in this administration, but also going back to the previous administration. And so a couple of things in response. One, I want to be certain and assure everyone here that we echo what the ambassador said earlier about the pandemic agreement. That also applies to the international health regulations and any negotiations or amendments there. We are not going to accept anything that would undermine our national sovereignty.
That's the problem right there. If our current administration is willing to sell us out so easily, which we're witnessing them doing on a daily basis, who's to say that our national sovereignty includes protecting the American people? What we are witnessing is this administration doing things that protect self-interests, not the interests of the American people. And here we have a fundamental problem where we've got people like this rooted in this Marxist ideology pushing to drive us towards more of a communist state. This is a bad idea. These people need to be called out.
And in fact, the WHO does not have that authority over our U.S. health policies. And so I wanted to be sure and reiterate that.
Maybe not today, the WHO has that kind of power, but that's the whole point of making these amendments and putting together this pandemic treaty. This is a power grab. And you know, these people are so sly in the way of trying to get these questions over with and assure the people that they're not doing that, but that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, this is a lot of power to give to Dr. Tedros, who has a history of not only being politically corrupt, but also have failed in demonstrating that he can handle these types of situations. I mean, we've had failure with the Ebola crisis. We had failure with COVID. I mean, does anybody trust this guy? I don't.
I think that in addition, one of the things that we are hoping, I also wanted to assure you, that the U.S. is very much at the table for these negotiations. And so we do have visibility into the various amendments being proposed and the opportunity or ability to push back, again, as we need to, out of respect for our own sovereignty or other national laws and policy, and that is something we are absolutely doing if and when necessary.
I don't trust this woman for 1 second.
Also, one of the reasons why we touched on verification of public information is because you had actors like the CCP or PRC not providing that. And so we wanted to provide a sort of alternate pathway, again, to protect America and the world in the event countries weren't being forthcoming.
Thank you, Ms. Pace. I can also assure you in a future Trump administration, given the way the WHO conducted itself, it could be very likely that we withdraw again from the WHO. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I don't necessarily agree with everything that Marjorie Taylor Greene says all the time. However, in this circumstance, she is truly for the people and looking out for us. In a perfect world, all of this sounds wonderful, but we all know that the people that are involved more than likely are doing this for selfish reasons and are extremely corrupt. We know quite a few characters in the political sphere that you shouldn't trust. What I do think, though, is that should there be a shift and a pushback and the people have more of a voice and more feeling or a sense of control and being able to maintain their personal sovereignty, then there could be some type of give and take. But in this situation, with this organization, they are making decisions for you. And I'm not sure how you feel about that, but for me, I do not comply, and I will not comply. It really does fall on each of us to take responsibility to learn about what's going on and decide for ourselves if this is the future that we want. But until then, I do hope that you do come back and join me on this journey of learning what is really going on so we can make these decisions and make the right ones. But if you like this video, please do not forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe because I will be dropping more videos pertaining to this Davos annual meeting and uncovering what it's really all about and you definitely don't want to miss it. But until then, I ask you please be safe and I'll see you soon.